she comes. We will kill the old red rooster, we will kill the old red rooster, we will kill the old red rooster when she comes. We'll have chicken, we'll have dumplings when she comes. We'll have chicken, we'll have dumplings when she comes. We'll have chicken, we'll have dumplings, we'll have chicken, we'll have dumplings, we'll have chicken, we'll have dumplings when she comes.
Well, from the intro music, I'm sure you have figured out what I'm going to make for dinner tonight. It should be pretty simple and plain to see. But it kind of came about because, several months ago, after watching these two women fight over one bag of toilet paper at Walmart, I decided I ought to get some meat of some sort as a backup for the pantry, and I went down there and bought a couple cans of Spam and a couple cans of chicken and several cans of sardines, which my wife won't eat anyway, but it's beside the point. And a bunch of Vienna sausage and things like that. Good meat type snacks. And so far it's all been sitting there in the pantry ever since. So I dug out one of those 12-ounce cans of chicken and the rest of the makings, and I'm going to make chicken and dumplings for dinner tonight. And I'm going to follow that up with a story. Well, I got everything out here that I'm going to need. I've got the chicken, I've got biscuits, cream of chicken soup, chicken stock, olive oil, and some peas and carrots here, frozen peas and carrots. And down there I've got some chopped onions that I'll start it off with. We'll start it off with a little olive oil here, and some diced onion, and put that in there. Let it cook until it just starts to soften a little and become transparent. That way it isn't hard and lumpy in the finished product. It won't cook up like some of the other items will. Well, the onion is just starting to brown around the edges and get soft, so this is the point where you start putting in the liquids and things like that. Now I'm going to use boxed chicken stock here. I could make my own. You could make it out of Weiler's bouillon mix. I'm going to put about that much in there to start with. And I'm going to add the juice from the chicken in there. And I would say 5 or 6 ounces of peas and carrots. Just a handful is all it takes. You just do it about, what the heck. Had a half package, I'll just use a half package in there. Let that come up to a boil. Okay. The liquid is boiling there, so next thing comes the can of biscuits. I've always called these womp biscuits because you womp them on the edge of the cabinet to open them. Or stick your thumbnail in there and they pop open. Now these are your dumplings. And the easiest way to cut those to size is with a pair of kitchen scissors. And you just start nipping off pieces. You don't want to make them too big. You want them nice bite-sized once they have baked and swelled up in size, and they do. See them rising in there. And the last one. Now we'll stir those in and separate them in there so they don't stick together and form one huge lump. You want them individually. And at this point I'll throw in the chicken. Now we'll let those simmer for about 15 minutes. That's about what the biscuits take to cook in the oven, so that's what it's going to take to cook in there. It's been simmering about 15 minutes, so I'll check it for salt now. It needs some salt, not a lot. And black pepper. Always uses black pepper. And now finally, to make the gravy nice and thick, is the can of cream of chicken soup. And one final taste for salt and seasoning like that. Tastes pretty darn good to me. Maybe a little more salt. So now I'm going to turn the burner off and put a lid on it, and it'll be ready to reheat at dinner time. Well, here it is on the table. How is it, hon?
Oh, it's good.
Check this out. That is good soup. Well, finished the soup and it was delicious. But I promised you a story, and so here goes. And since it's going to be a war story about when I was in Korea, I decided to wear the cap that I wore when I was in Korea. When we arrived there in 1951, we were sent to K-1 Air Base, which was an old one built by the Japanese back during the 1930s. It had a short runway, only about 3,600 feet, and it was 1 foot above sea level. And the runway was crushed oyster shells and sand and little gravel and whatnot like that, and heavier airplanes had trouble with their tires sinking in. And the 1st Marine Air Wing that flew Corsairs was stationed there, and we had been there about an hour when they started loading up to leave, and it wasn't long until they were completely gone, and the only thing remaining was school for the South Korean Air Force, and they only had 10 students there and 1 instructor, and that was the entire personnel, and they were meeting in a room there in the just off the ramp, and reading about the history of them. The Americans about a year before that had given them 6 L-4 airplanes, which was the little Piper Cubs that they used during World War II as artillery spotter and whatnot like that. And they were great trainers. Except they didn't have a single person who could fly, not even the instructor for the camp or the camp commander was a pilot. And then they had 1 other airplane there, this big old biplane sitting there. And it seemed about the only thing they ever did with it was roll it out and wash it about once a week, and then roll it back and tie it down next to the building where they met. And but the L-4s, none of them were flyable. There's 3 or 4 of them sitting around there with bent wings or bent up on its nose and the prop broken on it, or over on its back, and disabled one way or the other. So none of them were flyable. But anyway, they decided to move the school, and they loaded up everything, all the desks and everything, and the personnel and all, and left that big old airplane sitting there in the way. So I don't know who hooked up to it, and they dragged it to the end of the runway and lifted up there out of the way. And it was parked up there just off the end of the runway. And about that time they stopped flying out of there, everything except emergencies, because of the bad shape of the runway, and we were going to start work on it. Well, we had been working on the runway for a while and had graded it and got it in pretty good shape and everything, and one Sunday morning I had a chance and I went up there to look at that airplane, and It was a big old biplane like Stearman's that I flew surplus after World War II, and they sold them surplus. In fact, it was bigger than a Stearman, and the tires on it were about half flat and whatnot. And I went up there with a guy that was in the motor pool by the name of Claude Simons, and we were looking at it, and I said, you know what? Climbed up on it, and it had a half tank of gas in it, and I checked the controls and all that, and everything worked. And I said, you know, I bet if we put some air in that air tank for the starter and got it started, I could fly this sucker. He says, you're out of your mind. I said, oh no, it's just an airplane's an airplane, and if I can start it, I can fly it. So I said, why don't you go to the motor pool and get the truck with the air compressor on it and bring it down here so we can pump up the tires and put some air in the starting tank. So he did, and we aired up the starting tank, which is a high pressure air tank right behind the back seat, and put air in the tires. And I pulled it through a few times, primed the engine, cranked it over, and it just started and ran like a charm. And so I warmed it up there, and I told him, I said, get in, we'll go for a ride. He got in, and we taxied out there on the runway, and I took off, and it just flew like a great big old slow heavy airplane. It wasn't anything in particular. And we flew around about 15 or 20 minutes and came back and landed, and I taxied back where it had been, and we were standing there, and I heard a Jeep coming, and I looked up, and here came this Jeep flying down the runway in a cloud of dust and everything, and on the windshield, just below the windshield, it says Arab. Oh crap, it's a battalion commander, no less. He came up there and jumped out, and he says, Foreman, what the hell are you doing? He says, if you crashed that thing, I'd have to fill out paperwork the rest of my life on the airplane, and probably on you for killing yourself. He says, now get away from there and don't you ever get close to it again. And I, yes sir. Right. And he took off, and Claude turned around and he said, I figured your stripes were gone. But that was all that ever came of that, and it stayed there for several more months. And one day I went by, or up there, and they had a bunch of Korean soldiers out there, and they were trying to start it using a rope and a bungee thing over the prop tip, and they would run out there at the end of that rope and pull on it, and that'd pull it through one compression. And I didn't stop, and I thought, well, I could show them how to start it, but I wasn't going to. And after the way the colonel had chewed me out about it, I wasn't going to get close to it. But anyway, it took off, and I don't know who was flying it, but it disappeared and never saw it again. But that's my war story. So God bless America, God bless Texas. Where else could you find a state with a sign or something like this? Bye.